Chapter 7. Stan and Pepper and I sat across from the gas station where Leslie and Helter were making their final preparations to leave. They had found themselves a brand new Ford Bronco. They had stocked it with guns and food and clothes. Now they were topping off the gas tank, and a spare tank they had wrestled into the back. They were afraid fuel might be short on the road, but I didn't believe it would be a problem. "You know," I said to Stan and Pepper, "I freaked out this morning when I realized everyone was gone. But then I adjusted. I began to accept the idea. You two helped me. Maybe we did fall into another dimension. Maybe the saucers came and dumped us on the planet Xeon. I could handle all that. But now I've got another problem I can't handle. I feel like screaming." "What is it?" Stan asked. The three of us were sitting on a curb, the three stooges, me in the middle. Stan continued to clutch the ravaged diary. 50 yards away, Helter and Leslie were doing their best to ignore us. They would be gone within minutes. Helter had the gas pump set on automatic and was busy checking the air pressure in the tires. Leslie was fiddling with something in the back of the Bronco, a cigarette in her mouth. I had never seen her smoke before. She had changed out of her pajamas and into black jeans and a tight red blouse. "Well," I said, "we seem to have a strange girl, who happens to be dead, who grew up with exciting characters like Fat Freddy, and who put a hex on every boy who wouldn't kiss her. In fact, this same girl, who I might have seen hitchhiking this morning in the middle of nowhere, seems to have had a big effect on everyone who knew her intimately. A big bad effect." I paused and took a deep breath. "I was just wondering what the hell is happening, and why isn't anyone telling me about it?" I smiled sweetly at Stan. "Do you see my problem?" Stan nodded casually. "I don't know what the hell is going on either. Maybe we should both start screaming." "But you at least have your suspicions," I said. "You're the one who dragged us straight to Betty Sue's house. Why? And forget what you told us in the ice cream parlor. You wanted to go there from the word go." Stan shrugged as if he were embarrassed. "I had this dream." "What dream?" I asked. "When did you have it?" 4 weeks ago, the night Betty Sue died," Stan said. He frowned. "It was in the middle of the night. It might have been just when she died." "What was it about?" I asked. "I was walking around town," Stan said. "It was late and it was dark. The town was deserted, and I had a feeling it had been empty a long time. The wind was blowing in from the desert, and sand was collecting on the streets, slowly burying them. I felt terribly lonely, but no matter how long and far I walked, I couldn't find anybody. Yet, at the same time, I had a constant feeling that I was being watched. I'd suddenly whirl around and catch a glimpse of a black shadow, but when I focused harder, there would be nothing there." "How did the dream end?" I asked. "It didn't end," Stan said. "It seems to go on and on. That's what I remember most clearly, its timelessness. When I woke up, it was still with me. Then I heard the news about Betty Sue." He shook his head. "Yeah, I guess that's what made me link our situation now with her. Good old Betty Sue." "Let's get this straight," I said. "Do you think she was a witch or what?" Stan seemed surprised. "Not that I know of. She was a writer." "That we already know," Pepper said without enthusiasm. "No," Stan said. "She was a wonderful writer. She showed me some of her stories. They were a lot better than that Laddie Ball story." "Did people always die in them?" I asked. "Sometimes," Stan said. "Sometimes not. They were about all kinds of things. Talking appliances, intelligent butterflies, time travelers from other galaxies." He paused and scratched his head. "But that Laddie Ball tale was a strange one. It was short, and yet it kept repeating itself, almost as if she meant it more as a song." "Or a chant," I said. Stan nodded. "It had that kind of feel to it." I rubbed my hands together impatiently. "You know, all the questions we've asked ourselves today, and all the answers we've come up with, have ultimately said nothing. So let's get down to it. What was so special about Betty Sue? And what did she have to do with our predicament?" "I honestly don't know," Stan said. "How well did you know her?" I insisted. He hesitated. "I was her friend. We were in chemistry together." "Did you ever go out with her?" I asked. "Not on a date." Stan gave a wry smile. "I'm the class nerd. Nerds don't go on dates. They're just happy if a girl wants them to help them with their homework." "Did you help Betty Sue with her homework?" I asked. "No," Stan said. "I let her copy off my test papers. It saved us both a lot of time, but don't get the wrong impression. She wasn't stupid. In fact, I would say she was probably the only truly brilliant person in our class." "You're that person," I protested. Stan shook his head. "I'm clever. I'm not brilliant. True geniuses are rare. Betty Sue was a genius. You read only a sample of her writing." It was by no means her best stuff, but you must have felt the magic in it. When she wrote something, it was alive. Stan paused again, and now he was troubled. It was almost as if her words had power. Leslie sure seems to think they do, I said, glancing over at our two would-be explorers. I wondered for a second what they'd find in L.A. I wondered if they'd even make it that far. Stan hadn't exactly said so, but I knew he believed there was no one left in the entire world except us. I wish she talked to us, Stan said, referring to Leslie. Maybe if we went with her, she would, Pepper answered. He caught my eye and shook his head. Whatever, he muttered. We still have to talk, I said. I have nothing to talk about, Pepper said flatly. I can leave, Stan volunteered. Don't, I said. It's all right. It looks like we're all going to have plenty of time to talk, alone or together. That reminds me, Stan asked. I think you know what I'm going to ask. About this morning? I asked. I don't mean to pry, Stan said carefully, but these friends of yours in Foster. We have no friends in Foster, I said. Pepper and I were there on private business is all, but everything else was as I described. Did you talk to people there this morning? Stan asked. Yes. You don't want to tell me who? You don't want to tell me who? Stan asked. I understand if you don't. I smiled at Stan, although I didn't feel much like smiling. I trusted him. I should have just told him the truth and been done with it. But I didn't know how Pepper would react. I'm glad you understand, I said. Stan nodded. That's fair. Would it be fair if I asked you more about your last visit with Betty Sue? I asked. He thought for a moment. I'm going to have to ask for your understanding. It looks like Helter's ready to say goodbye to us, Pepper said, pointing. Armed and combat ready for the enemy, Helter was lumbering across the road to pay his final respects. I continued to follow Leslie out of the corner of my eye. She had climbed out of the back of the Bronco and was trying to squeeze a few final drops into the main gas tank. You guys having any second thoughts? Helter asked. Are you? Pepper asked. Helter pointedly glanced back at Leslie. Hell no. She's a babe. I would never have got a piece like her if there were people around. What if you meet other people? I asked. Other guys. Do you think that Leslie's going to stay with you? Helter obviously hadn't thought of that. He fingered his jaw. I guess I'll just have to impress her with my charm before we get to L.A. Are you taking Highway 10? Stan asked. I suppose, Helter said. Stan checked the time. It's 3 o'clock, and the sun seems to be crossing the sky at the same speed as usual. It'll be dark before you get there. Be careful on the road. There could be cars sitting right in the middle of the highway. It might be better if you didn't drive at night. You might want to stop and check into a motel, I said. Helter grinned wolfishly. Hey, as long as they don't ask me for a credit card, we should be okay. He held out his hand to Pepper. I'm sorry I shot your girlfriend. I like the part friends. Pepper was surprised. He shook Helter's hand. You listen to what Stan said, Pepper told him. And when you get there, call my number. It's 5679. Just remember you start at 5 and you skip the 8. Leave a message if I'm not in. I'll call tonight and tell you what's out there, Helter said. He offered me his hand. Rocks. Helter, I said, and I don't know why, but I stood up and hugged him. Don't go shooting any other pretty girls? Only if they shoot first, he said, giving me a strong squeeze. He let go and turned to Stan at last, but Stan seemed preoccupied. He was watching Leslie intently. He didn't even hear when Helter said his name. Huh? Stan mumbled finally. Saying goodbye, Helter said. Stan blinked at him, then glanced back at Leslie. Don't go just yet, he said. Helter snorted. We've talked about this till we're blue in the face. We want to go now while the sun's still up. Leslie won't spend another night in this town. He offered Stan his hand. We'll talk on the phone if they keep working. Stan held on to Helter's hand and didn't let go. He was suddenly uneasy. Helter, Stan said, listen to me. Something's wrong. I can't quite place it. You have to give me a minute. Helter laughed and shook him off. You're a great guy, but you think too much, Stan. Me and Leslie are going to have some fun. We're going out on the town. He turned away. Stay healthy. We watched him go, Stan especially. He kept his eyes locked on Helter and Leslie and the gas station, and I followed his lead. The Bronco tank had to be overflowing by now, I thought. Leslie pulled the nozzle out of the tank and started to place it back on the pump. But she still had that goddamn cigarette in her mouth, and as far as we all knew, she didn't smoke that much. It was a dirty habit anyway. It ruined your lungs. It gave you cancer. It cut short your life. It made you cough, particularly when you were just starting to smoke again. Leslie coughed as she hung up the dripping pump. The cigarette popped out of her mouth. It fell on the ground and rolled out of sight. Stan leapt to his feet. "Leslie!" he cried, and started running toward the station, toward Tough Dude Helter and Salem High's All-American Beauty. Stan was 15 feet from Helter and 70 feet from the gas station when the orange flame suddenly snaked up Leslie's side of the Bronco. It looked like no big deal at first, just a little fire and smoke, but the snake was in a hurry. It had places to go. Leslie watched it crawl right up to the opening of the gas tank. I knew she shouldn't have overfilled the thing and splashed so much around. The fumes are what ignite. Leslie stared dumbfounded, then jerked her head over in our direction. Right then, Leslie's world exploded. The tank in the Bronco went first, an orange ball of death shelling out glowing mangled steel. It was enough as far as Leslie was concerned. The shock wave slammed her into the pump and the flames of metal ripped through her torso. Just like that, her story was over. 18 years of school and acting and the best shampoo, just wasted. Smoke. God. Stan was smart. He saw what was coming. He slammed into Helter and they both fell to the ground just as the huge tank beneath the burning pump met the flames. This ball was atomic. The shock wave hit Pepper and me like the hammer of Thor. We were knocked off the curb and onto our backs. For a moment, thought was blown from my mind, and I could hear nothing. I don't know how long I lay there. I know my eyes were closed as Pepper pulled me to my feet. My eyes popped open. "Are you all right?" he shouted. I knew he was shouting, even though he sounded far away. My ears weren't really ringing. It was more like I was underwater. "Yes." "What?" I nodded. "Yes." He nodded. "Good." We turned toward Helter and Stan. They were getting up slowly. The shockwave must have hit them really hard. If Helter had been standing, he would have died. We all stared at one another for a minute, our faces as blank as those of fish dragged into the open air with hooks in their mouths. Why look over anyway? So we could see what was left of Leslie, if anything? But people are sick. I know I am. I looked. We all did. We saw hell. We saw an eviscerated Ford Bronco. Gas pumps that fumed like stumps of sulfur. Billowing flames that rent the air like angry whips. The shattered concrete was a volcanic fissure. But did we see Leslie? Maybe a part of her. It lay beside a melting tire, smoking. This is too sick. It might have been a leg. I would never have got a piece like her if there were people around. Helter had just been being Helter. But still, I couldn't bear it. I turned away and gagged on vomit that never passed my lips. I heard Stan speak behind me from far away. Latty Ball blew out her candles, he said. Chapter 8. We sat in the center of the town square. Half an hour had passed since the cremation of Leslie Bell. Off to the south, in the direction of the gas station, the smoke continued to rise. The station was somewhat isolated, and Stan believed the fire wouldn't spread. Stan sat with the charred diary of Betty Sue resting on his lap. He turned what was left of the pages carefully. Pepper and Helter sat and did nothing. None of us had spoken in a while. I figured I might as well be the first. I hope she didn't feel anything, I said. She didn't know what hit her, Stan said. I remembered her stricken expression as she looked over at us. She knew, I said. More silence, more wind. It blew out of the south. The direction had not changed since the day had begun. South, the general direction of Foster and the abortion clinic. The wind brought the sand, and the sand scratched at my skin like invisible pelting rain. I could smell the smoke from where we sat. The gas station also lay to the south. I don't know how to grieve for Leslie. I hadn't known her that well. I had liked her in our other world. But in this place with no people, her death seemed somehow surreal. Or perhaps it was the reverse. It had seemed quite natural that she should have gone. I know that sounds terrible, but it was true. The silence was so alive. It was as if it couldn't tolerate any living things disturbing it. I wondered if the silence would come from more of us. This thing is really hard to read, Stan said, his face close to the diary. Can you read any of it? I asked. He nodded. Bits. He glanced at Helter and Pepper. Not much. Does she always sound crazy? I asked. Yes and no, Stan said. She was definitely unusual. Stan set the diary aside. I'm more interested now in reading the stories that were on those loose pages. Why? I asked. Stan shrugged. If I tell you what I think, you'll think I'm crazy. Try us, Pepper said. Stan looked at the distant smoke. Leslie died like Latty. No, she didn't, I said. It was totally different. Stan shook his head. It was the same. The story was a metaphor for Leslie. I don't see the connection at all, I said, lying. What he was saying spooked me like nothing that had happened since that morning, and I think it was because he had finally touched upon a truth. Did you know Leslie when she was young? Stan asked us all. I didn't live here, Pepper said. I'd seen her around town, I said. I knew her, Helter said. Of us all, he was the most upset over what had happened to her, and I don't think it was just because he had lost his source of sexual delight. He had wept as the flames streamed before us. He just kept saying over and over again, she was so beautiful, she was so beautiful, but not in a crude way. I believe the possibility of going off with her had meant more to him than any of us could imagine. I knew her, Stan said. She wasn't nearly as cute as she was later on. So, I asked, that's common. People blossom. She blossomed a lot, Stan said. Yeah, Helter said, showing interest. She was ugly when I was a kid. I used to throw rocks at her. Wait a second, Pepper interrupted. I want to stop this before it goes any further. Betty Sue had nothing to do with Leslie being pretty. I don't think he's saying that, I told my boyfriend. Maybe I am, Stan said. Remember what she said in her diary? I have done so much for her. I made her what she is. Pepper got up and paced in front of us. I cannot accept any of this. Everyone has disappeared. All right, that's weird. Logic can't explain it, but to make a suicidal young woman into some kind of sorcerer is ridiculous. Sorcerer, Stan said. That's an interesting choice of words. She was no sorcerer, Pepper said. I'm not saying she was, Stan said, except to say she was very unusual. But let's talk a bit about Leslie and Latty. Helter can tell you, Leslie was unattractive up until she was about 14. Now, I know she was going through puberty, and I understand about the whole hormone thing, but the change in her was extraordinary. Leslie hit 14 and suddenly glowed. I often thought that about her, I said. Stan nodded. Leslie was the closest of us to Betty Sue. They grew up together. They shared secrets. The diary says that much. In fact, it sounds like they shared peculiar secrets. Of us all, Leslie was the most terrified of Betty Sue. She was terrified of what Betty Sue had written. It was as if she knew Betty Sue had power. What power? I asked. Isn't it obvious? Stan asked. To make things happen? Stop, Pepper pleaded. Did you ever see any demonstration of her power? I asked. Not exactly, Stan said. What does that mean? I asked. Did you or didn't you? Stan fingered the burnt diary, his touch almost loving. It struck me then that Stan had cared for Betty Sue a great deal, perhaps even loved her. I would go to see her for no reason on the spur of the moment, he said, and she would always be there waiting for me. She'd smile and say she brought me there. Anybody can say anything, Pepper said. Stan shook his head sadly. I wouldn't really want to go, but I would anyway. Why wouldn't you want to go? I asked. Maybe because I was afraid of her too, Stan said. What was she like? I asked. From what I remember, she was always alone. She was shy and soft-spoken, Stan said. That might be hard to believe from what you read of her diary, but people can write at length about things they wouldn't even think around other people. She was polite, but there was something about her. He stopped. What? I asked. Stan slowly made a fist, his gaze focused in the far distance. I don't like talking about things like this now. You think it might be dangerous? I asked. He looked at me. Yes. Tell us your big story, Pepper said impatiently. Stan glanced up in surprise. It's not a big story. It's really a small thing what I was going to say, but I guess it's revealing. He took a breath. Once when I went to see her, she was in the backyard, collecting butterflies in big glass jars. There were a lot of flowers in her yard, and butterflies gathered there. She would hum a song. It seemed to bring them nearer to her. Then she trapped them in her jars, and screw on the lids, and leave them alone. That doesn't sound particularly cruel, I said, imagining that he was going to tell us that she stuck needles through their bodies or something ghoulish like that. He swallowed uneasily before he continued, however, and I realized in that pause that Betty Sue would never have been so obvious. The lids had nail holes punched in them, Stan said. There was plenty of air for the butterflies. She had dozens of jars. She would collect dozens of butterflies, but then she would leave the jars out in the backyard and just sit and watch the butterflies die. Why would they die? I asked. Because she would leave them in the sun, Stan said. You're all familiar with the greenhouse effect. The air inside the jars would slowly heat up and kill the butterflies. But that wasn't what would get me. It was the way she'd talk as she watched them die. You see, Stan, she'd say, butterflies are dumb. They don't even know when they're in a glass jar. They can see everything just the same, and because of that, they think they can fly wherever they want, like always. But inside my jars, they're only allowed to fly in tiny circles. Then she leaned over and smiled at me and said, "People are a lot like butterflies, don't you think, Stan?" "What did you say to her?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. "I said what I thought," Stan said, "that butterflies and people had little in common that I could see." That made her laugh. She said, "To you maybe, but not to me." "Is there a moral to this story?" Pepper asked. Stan spoke firmly. "Leslie was a plain girl with zero charisma. Almost overnight, she became a beautiful young lady. I believe Betty Sue gave her that beauty. I don't know how, I don't know why. And I also believe Betty Sue took away that beauty. I believe Betty Sue killed Leslie." "Betty Sue is dead," Pepper shouted. "She may be dead," Stan said, "or she may be alive. We can't be sure. Her body was never positively identified, but in either case, her work lives on." "Her stories?" I asked, trying to put this all together. "Yes," Stan said. "And you believe all this just because you go over to her house even when you didn't want to?" Pepper asked sarcastically. "That's just one of the reasons," Stan said. "But look at her story of Latty Ball. Notice the initials are the same as Leslie Bell's? That story was about Leslie, and Leslie knew it. That was why she was so anxious to destroy it. She knew the power of Betty Sue's pen. Betty Sue gave Leslie a mask so that she could be the best. That was Leslie's beauty. Then Betty Sue destroyed the mask with her candles. Did any of you ever see Leslie smoke before? Of course you didn't. Leslie didn't smoke. She only started today because she had to." "What do you mean, she had to?" I asked. "Was she commanded?" "I believe so," Stan said. "I hope she didn't write a story about me," Helter said. From the quaver in his voice, he was obviously buying everything Stan was laying down. I wasn't. I mean, Stan had insight into the situation, and I didn't think he was making stuff up just to scare us. But he had turned Betty Sue into a Jedi Knight who had gone over to the dark side. If I bought that scenario, I thought, then I might as well go wait in a car for her to come and drive me off the side of the planet. Yet, looking around at an empty planet made it impossible for me to dismiss Stan out of hand. The more he spoke, the more I felt like I was falling into a silent void, where gravity wasn't the only thing pulling me down. Maybe the car would come to pick me up after all, and Betty Sue would be behind the wheel, smiling. "Latty Ball," I whispered. "I wonder what she called each of us." "We'll never know," Pepper said in dismissal, "and it doesn't matter." Stan stood. "We can know. We can try to find the pieces of paper that Leslie tore up and fit them back together." Pepper grabbed Stan. "You're going too far." Stan just looked at him. "She was strange, Pepper, but she was almost more strange than a dead planet." "But you liked her?" Pepper said. Stan nodded. "She was childlike inside, too. I liked that part of her." Pepper regarded him closely. "What did she do for you?" he asked. Stan sighed. "Nothing, I hope."